I guess, I don't know if it's so much punishment that changes behavior or more of a philosophy and a belief about kind of what our expectations are for students. I'm a firm believer that if you treat students like leaders and you let them have ownership in the school and culture and kind of how things are run, you don't deal with a whole lot of punishment. Again, does punishment work to change behavior? Sometimes, not always, depending on the punishment. And, you know, it's a challenging situation because some kids, you know, you kind of have to get at the root of why a student is making a poor decision, and then you kind of determine from there, like what the appropriate punishment would be, etc. So there's a number of different behaviors that can get a student suspended. Typically, there's an ed code list, and you can just check down the list. A lot of the things that we see that I've kind of experienced are more kind of substance abuse. If students are coming to school under the influence of alcohol or marijuana or something else, fighting, great disrespect to a teacher. Those are kind of the three areas that I predominantly have dealt with in my years as an administrator. Expelled, same kind of thing. A lot of times a student is expelled for numerous repeat offenses. Or there's, again, going back to ed code, there is a little checkoff list. So if a student brandishes a knife, if a student brings a weapon to school, I do not have the power to expel a student. What I do is I make a recommendation for expulsion, and then there's a whole hearing panel and a whole process that goes on with expulsions. But yes, we never want our kids expelled. It has been a recommendation for expulsion.
Okay.
That's, to me, that's the worst thing that you can do is then I've now lost all control. I have no chance to remediate a situation if I've had to recommend expulsion. So for me, that's the biggest punishment that I can give. I guess right now, I've been in 3 different school districts, and kind of throughout all 3, I would say probably the biggest thing that I deal with is, again, students being under the influence of either alcohol or marijuana. Unfortunately, I would really like the most common action that students get to see me is they want to come in and say hi and check in and things how we're going. Let's talk about grades, let's talk about college, let's talk about careers. That's what I would love, honestly, for kids to start getting involved in, but unfortunately it's kind of that, or a lot of times too, conflicts with teachers. So student and teacher have kind of butted heads, and then how do we negotiate that situation? In my mind, I don't even know if it's so much a punishment, but it's more like a conversation. And again, it kind of goes back to my first thing in terms of what kind of school culture do we have? Again, and when you can kind of create that conversation when you talk to a student and say, hey, look, let's look at your actions. Can we start talking about why those aren't appropriate, or like what led you to this decision? To me, the conversations and kind of creating game plans of how it's not going to happen again in the future, that's hands down is the most effective to me. Having a student take ownership in his or her behavior, and then again working collaboratively to figure out how to deal with that situation is the most effective to me. Again, and which is horrible, and again, like I said, when a student's expelled, I have lost all expelled. I have no means to remediate with that child to try and kind of, again, bring you back into the family, bring you back into the fold.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of that's my biggest challenge, but then they're gone. So they are no longer a member of this community. You know what, it depends. Honestly, hands down, the ones, and this wasn't here, I was at a previous school district, I had a student who was under the influence, and it was a pretty challenging situation, and we had to call paramedics, and that family came back and made their child kind of volunteer for the volunteer fire department, kind of write everybody letters, kind of have a conversation with me and kind of with some of her classmates to say how embarrassed she was. Hands down, that has been the most, and again, and this happened when kid was a freshman, never any other issues, and it was a big kind of wake-up call for me.
Sure.
That was the most effective punishment I've ever seen a parent do, because again, it's, you know, the student was held accountable for her behavior and made reparations. Hands down, it was the greatest thing I've ever seen. But typically what we deal with our parents is kind of loss of privileges, cell phones taken away, grounding, not being allowed to go out with friends, a lot of times.
The basics.
Yeah, the basics,
Yeah.
kind of taking computer privileges away, no access to the internet, that kind of stuff.